Aztec Nation. Welcome to the Aztec Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Tron, and let's just get right into it today. Wanted to start off with an apology of sorts, I guess. I have been gone for like a month, and that was not that was not planned. It was not by design. Uh, the first like week was really, but then after that, I've been trying to get back and stuff. Keeps on keeps on happening. That prevents me from getting into the studio, including this week. I finally had some time, and it turned out the studio was booked. It was booked, so I couldn't get in even when I finally had some time. Uh, so wanted to just apologize for that. Shout out to everybody who has been bearing with me here, uh, and get into the show. I guess if you can't already tell. And slash, I guess, didn't read the title because I always title it this way, but this is a PupCast episode, which, if anybody's new, just means I'm recording while I'm walking my dog. Because, like I said, couldn't get into the studio this week, but really wanted to put something out there. The next day I was going to be able to was probably Tuesday at the earliest, maybe Wednesday, and on Wednesday there's a game. So wanted to get something out there. Um, yeah, the audio might not be as good. Um, as normal. My thoughts may be a little bit more ADHD than usual, which is already saying something that's already a high bar. Just want to put that out there in case anybody doesn't like this format, but I am going to try and get back into the studio again soon. What I wanted to do today was go over some talking points I've seen over the last month, really, that I haven't been potting, and just give my takes on some of them, how accurate I think they are, how inaccurate I may think they are, uh, and treat it almost like a mailbag episode, kind of. This show will go over like some of these takes aren't as prevalent anymore. They were prevalent a couple weeks ago, especially during like Players era, and now they're being talked about a lot less. But I still want to talk about them because I think that can demonstrate how we shouldn't be too reactionary in our analysis of the team. I think we can absolutely be reactionary in our fandom of the team. That's part of the fun of being a fan. Absolutely. Uh, and I just shoot every time, like I was watching the Lamar game, and every time they made another 3-pointer, you would have thought I thought the season was over, basically. So we can absolutely be reactionary in our fandom, but when we're trying to like diagnose the team and analyze it, I don't think we want to be too reactionary. And the fact that some of these things aren't being talked about as much anymore, I think kind of demonstrates that. And so with that out of the way, I think let's just get right to it. Uh, the first thing I want to talk about is NIL. And I think when people talk about NIL, they often at the same time mean NIL and the transfer portal. I I think honestly, when people talk, especially when they talk about the bad aspects of it, I think the transfer portal is the worst aspect, more so than NIL. Um, if it was just NIL, then the best like high school recruits would go to the best schools, but that was already happening. But you could still develop guys. But with the transfer portal, if you develop guys, they might leave for more money elsewhere because they can. And in general, I support the player freedom to do that, but it does come with some downsides. But let's get into it. So, especially during the players era, people were talking about how NIL would be kind of like the downfall of the S6 program, especially after the Michigan game, getting just walloped by them. You know, they're a team that reportedly has been paying an average of $1 million per player on their team. So their NIL is what, $13 million or something like that. Whereas the Aztecs is probably in the range of three. They don't really report it, but that's kind of my guess, just based off of counting the drives they do and the money from players era and the money from blenders and stuff like that. It's probably in the range of three would be my guess. Maybe as high as four, but that would be pushing it. And so there's definitely a resource disparity there. And that can be troublesome, absolutely. That's a whole thing. There's entire fields of economics that are based on how like that's basically all economics is how do you address the resource disparity. So it's definitely a thing, and it does make it hard when the other team has that much money to win. That being said, there was resource disparities before as well, right? When some programs, especially like the power conference programs, had money for the best locker rooms, the best practice facilities, the best campuses in general. Um, for some might have mattered, who has the best education. These are all things that mattered before. And to a certain extent, those things still matter. Absolutely. And now it's just also the player wants to get paid, as they should, honestly. And so these are all things to consider. And, it is the case that teams like the Aztecs had beaten those teams with better resources before, and at times will continue to do so. At the next day after they lost to Michigan, they beat Oregon, and Oregon has more NIL than the Aztecs. Uh, so I think to say it's like the end of the program is an overstatement. It's a factor. It's maybe even an additional factor that will make it harder to overcome, but I don't think it's the end all be all. And we can even just point out Kentucky in that regard. Kentucky, I think, has $22 million invested in their team, and they aren't looking great. They have a high floor because they have a lot of talent, but the pieces just don't fit together, and they don't seem to fit the coach's schemes very well either. And so they're kind of struggling relative to what everybody thought they would do, to a point where wouldn't expect them to miss the tournament, but I won't be surprised if they miss the tournament at this point in time. Uh, and they have, like I just said, they're spending the most in NIL more than anybody else. So it just goes to show that the money doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't solve all the problems. And I think in general, Coach Dutcher and his staff are pretty good at finding guys that fit the system and getting them ingrained in the system. And then overall, also pretty good at retaining the players, as we saw this year. Magoon Guath had at least $1 million offer, at least one, if not multiple $1 million offers that he turned down to return. Nothing was reported on Bird because he came out pretty early and said, I'm either doing draft or San Diego State. But you couldn't convince me that other programs didn't try. People didn't reach out and say, hey, we can give you this much money. And he turned it down, right? I'm sure to lesser extents, but I'm sure guys like Taj or Pharaoh, guys that showed promise as a young player had similar occurrences where people came and offered them money and they decided to stay. So Dutcher seems pretty good at that. Not perfect. There have been guys that have left, obviously, Nick Boyd being one of them. Um, but it seems like if the Aztecs can get a guy when they're younger, they're more likely to stay. Elijah Saunders being pretty much the exception. But when they get guys as freshmen and get them in the program and develop them that way, so far they've been likely to stay. We'll see what happens after this season. This season might be a bit contentious, but all that to say, I don't think NIL is going to be the the final nail in the coffin, I guess is how I would describe it. It's definitely a challenge. It's another thing for that the coaches and the players will have to combat against on top of everything else. But I don't think it's the end of it. Moving to point two, this one has died down, I think, a bit after the Lamar game. But Miles Bird, there was talk about is Miles Bird a liability to the team? And this was popular during the Players Era Festival because he scored 25 points over 3 games, and it wasn't particularly efficient 25 points. And then to make things worse, he played the Utah Valley game and scored 0 points and didn't play well. And so that meant he was scoring 25 points over a 4 game stretch, which is not what you want your star player to do, right? Because that's an average of 6 points and a little bit extra, right? 6 points a game. That's not what your star player, well, possibly your best player, what your player who's looking to get drafted, that's not what they should be doing. And if they're gonna do that, they need to be lockdown, elite defensive anchor type of presence, right? And even then, you're not going to get like drafted. You're probably not the best player on the team, but just that defense can help make up for it. And Milesburg defense has been good this season. Um, but I'm talking like Nathan Mensah level impact, where like the entire defense is built around you if you're going to be doing that. And that hasn't been the case this year for Miles Bird. He's been good on defense, but he hasn't been that. Uh, these talking points have gone the wayside a little bit. There was when it came out that Miles Bird had the flu on Utah Valley, there was some of like, okay, we have to give him credit for that, but that doesn't wash away the Players era outing, right? It's still 25 points in 3 games against the good competition you face this year. That's not that's not great. Uh, but the Lamar game did give some confidence back as he scored 19 points and did so efficiently. He kind of got back to his rhythm and showed that he could be a good player. At the very least, if we want to be real picky about it, he's shown that he can be a good player against the lesser competition. Now, that's still not what you want out of your best player. You want them to be good all the time, but at the very least, that's what he's shown. I don't think he's a liability. I think we'll talk about this, we'll bring this up again, but he's been hurt a lot early this season. He's had an abdominal thing. He's had a couple finger things, I think, and then the flu. Um, he just needs to get healthy, and consistency was already his issue to begin with. And so he needs to get healthy and just play more consistently, and then things will be fine, right? He might not be Neat Clifford being one of the best players in college basketball last year. He might not be that, but he'll be fine, and he definitely won't be a liability. He'll be a well above average player. If people want to say he doesn't look like he's a first round draft pick, that's a different conversation. That's one we can have. That's one I'd be more amenable to, and there's still a lot of season left for him to change that narrative. But a liability, like, no way. No way. In the Utah Valley game, maybe. Maybe, liability then. Uh, and he had the flu, so that makes sense. But in general, no way. Not a liability. I don't think that's one of those reactionary takes that I'm talking about. That a couple weeks pass and all of a sudden you don't hear it anymore because he had a good game. We'll see how he does against Air Force, and then we'll see how he does against Arizona. Those will be 2 big ones. Air Force because it's a conference game, and also because it's kind of a trap game with Arizona right on the horizon there. But you want to, like, especially now after the Troy loss, the Aztecs have to do very well in con. They can't do what they did last year in conference where they finish, fourth or fifth again. They can't do that because that Troy game is gonna hang like a weight around their neck. Um, so they need to be pretty dominant in conference. And so hopefully they can do that. And the way to start is on Wednesday with a win over Air Force. Let's go to point number 3. And this is one that is still out there. And I think it's a very interesting discussion. And that is basically what should happen with BJ Davis. And I guess more specifically, should BJ Davis be a starter? Because he has been killing it off the bench. If somebody wanted to say that he's been the best player for the team so far, it would be hard to argue that. I don't think the numbers fully support that. His first 2 games were pretty bad, but since those first 2 games, he's been killing it. And so Normally, and Ziegler asked this to Dutch. He asked normally when players do well off the bench, they get moved to a starting role. And is that going to happen with BJ? And Dutch said that he values BJ scoring off the bench and thinks it's valuable and thinks that that'll help them win games. That BJ's probably going to stay on the bench. And I think it's the correct result. I think the logic behind it maybe doesn't fully track. And so let's get into it, right? I think the logic behind it seems a little flawed, and it could be the case that Dutch is just simplifying things for the media, or not fully explaining his reasons, and he doesn't have to. He has no obligation to. It could be that's the case, but you really want your starting lineup to be your best lineup because that's the lineup that's going to play the most together. And so if BJ Davis being in the starting lineup is going to be the best lineup, that's what you would want. That's going to lead to the most wins. I think putting him in the starting lineup, though, isn't a good idea based off of the type of player he is. And this does assume a couple things, but just stay with me here. BJ Davis so far has been a very shot heavy guard. He's not passing the ball a whole lot. Kind of when he gets it, he's going to take the shot almost type of thing. And in the starting lineup, there's a plethora of other scorers. Reese Waters is definitely a scorer. He's not as shot heavy as BJ Davis is. And he maybe hasn't been, at least what I hoped he would be this year, but he's been solid for sure. And he can score in bunches. It just hasn't been game in and game out. But you have Waters as a scorer. And so if BJ Davis is in the starting lineup, he's taking shots from Waters. And in small samples, you're okay with that because BJ Davis has been the best scorer, the most efficient scorer on the team. You don't mind him taking shots from other players, really. But uh, over the course of a full game and over the course of a full season, you want Waters to have that confidence and to have those repetitions to be able to do well. And so you don't want that over the long term. Same thing with Miles Bird, right? Miles Bird just had 19 efficient points against Lamar. He's not going to get as many of those shots if BJ Davis is in the starting lineup because Davis is going to be taking them. Uh, and so now you're reducing both of those guys to almost more like, I don't even know if I want to say 3 and D roles, but just secondary and tertiary scores even more than they might have already been, um, in the starting lineup without BJ, right? And add in Magoon Guath to that, and Guath has been what he's been. There's arguments that he's been the worst player on the team, but uh, you're hoping that as the season goes on, he gets better and he becomes what he was at the end of last year, and then even better than what he was at the end of last year. And that's going to be another thing where he's going to need repetitions both in practice and in the games. And these roles are going to have to be defined between those big three, essentially, right? Those are your big three. They're going to need to figure out how to play together. And if you throw in BJ in there, taking shots from all three of them, that's going to make it even harder to do so, I think. Um, Contrast that with the bench as it stands right now. In fact, going back, that doesn't even count Elsie, who's been a solid scorer in flashes, right? He hasn't been a great scorer every game, but he's shown definite flashes of being able to score well. Um, and so it would depend on who he replaces, obviously. Most people say BJ should be a point guard. I think that's definitely, definitely wrong. Um, but aside from that, it would depend on who he's going to replace. But it's just gonna, I don't think the benefit in the starting lineup of having him would be as great as it would be coming off the bench, where look at the bench lineup right now. Uh, the point guard is Sean Newman, generally so far, and he's afraid to take a shot. I've really liked what I've seen from him overall as a team player, as a leader. Um, but he seems scared to shoot the ball. He always wants to pass it, which is a great guy to have next to a player like DJ Davis who always wants to shoot it. Uh, so you're not taking shots away from Sean Newman, right? You have uh Taj DeGorville. maybe hasn't been scared to shoot it, but hasn't been shooting it well. If BJ's taking shots from Taj DeBoerville, that's probably helping the team at this point so far. You have Jeremiah Odin, who has been better than I thought he would be. But also, if BJ's taking shots from Jeremiah Odin, you're fine with that. I would think I'm fine with that, right? Like the BJ's definitely going to be a better scorer than Jeremiah Odin. Tay Simmons, right? He's not a guy that should be taking a lot of shots unless he's getting them through, you know, simple actions like cross screens, or like putback type of things, right? If he gets a lot of those, absolutely take those shots. But he's not a guy that's creating his own shot or coming off of screens and scoring off the dribble or stuff like that, right? He's not a super what would be called a skilled player. And so BJ taking shots from all these types of players, you're fine with that, right? He can be the focal point of the offense. It kind of seems like his ideal role right now. And that's maybe part of why he's doing so well is because his role is firmly established at this point. Um, it's something that's going to work for him, and I don't know that if you move him to the starting lineup, that the success continues the way it has been. Even if he scores at the same rate, uh, I think that is more valuable coming off of the bench than it is in the starting lineup. Um, and that's That's my thoughts there. And then, I mean, most people, we can go into what position you would put him in. Who would he replace? That's the other interesting part of the conversation. A lot of people want him in at point guard, but he's not a point guard. And why is he not a point guard? A point guard doesn't have to set up their teammates. They don't have to be these super heavy pass first guys. But if they're going to be a score first guy, you probably want your team built a little differently than the Aztecs are built right now. You would want, your point guards doing all the scoring and everybody else is doing a lot of defending, a lot of shooting, a lot of cutting, stuff like that, and just let the point guard be ball dominant. Um, you can think of like Xavier Thames that year, right? Xavier Thames was a heavy scorer out of the point guard position. He could also pass though. Malachi Flynn also heavy scorer, but could also pass. And BJ Davis hasn't shown that ability as a passer at this point in his career. And so it would just be him hogging the ball. I don't want to make it sound like I don't like him as a player. He's been fantastic, but I don't know how the role works well synergistically. And I don't want to end up kind of like Kentucky where the pieces don't fit together. And I kind of think that's what would happen there. So you're not replacing the point guard with him. You're going to keep LZ or Sean or Taj or somebody else out there with him. Okay. Um, are you taking out Miles Heide and sliding everybody up? That's problematic because Magoon at this point can't play for super long stretches, and you shouldn't have Miles Bird play the four. He's long and he's athletic, but he's not big enough to take that level of beating for extended durations. And so you don't want that. Um, you could take out Magoon. There are some numbers that just indicate he's been very bad this season. The Lamar game was better, but just hasn't been great so far this season. Do you take him out of the starting lineup? Well, you're having the same issue where you're sliding Miles Bird into that power forward spot, and you don't want that. Do you take Miles Bird out of the starting lineup? No. If he was a liability, maybe, but we covered that. I don't think he is. And on top of that, he's kind of like the emotional heart and soul of the team. And he's the only player that's consistently getting up in the 30-minute range each game. And so taking him out of the starting lineup would be such a weird gift, and who knows what that might do to the team as a whole because he's kind of their leader. Uh, so you don't do that. The one player could be Reese Waters because even though he's not as shot heavy as BJ Davis, they have similar enough play styles that it could work. And BJ would also be a better defender probably overall, even though he's a little bit smaller. Uh, so that'd be kind of one player that you could maybe do it with. And if that was how they were going to do it, I could maybe get behind it. Uh, and then, you have Reese Waters be that scorer off the bench. But Does that make your bench unit now like does that make it much harder for the bench unit to score? Which might be kind of crazy to hear after the last two games where they've been scoring a lot, but a lot of those points also came from BJ Davis. Um, so what does that do to the bench scoring? And not that you don't want starting scoring as well, but I think I just have faith that the current starting lineup will be able to figure out the scoring and get more scoring out there. I don't think the offense has been the problem for the team overall. And so finding ways to generate more points seems like there's not as great of a possible return there as there is fixing other problems. So all in all, I don't think BJ should move to the starting position. If he comes back next year, hopefully he does, and if he does, then he can be superstar scorer on the starting unit next year. This year, I feel like he's found his ideal role for what the team needs at this point. I think the other really interesting topic is related to the depth. The Aztecs are playing 11 guys, and is that actually a problem for the team? And in general, when people talk about depth, I think it can be a problem in that sense. And if, going back for years, I would talk to people at the beginning of every season and say, you have to cut. People would be talking about, look at all these players we have. This is such a deep team. And I would say, yeah, but you have to cut it down to nine. Only nine of them are going to play. And then all of a sudden, that gets really hard to do because who are you leaving out, right? Uh, and then for the last couple years, the Aztecs have actually been playing 10 instead of nine. The reasoning behind playing nine was generally that if you play more than that, guys struggle to get into an offensive rhythm. Uh, and so your kind of scoring output goes down, and that's not good. But over the last couple of years, they've been playing 10, and it's been fine. Um, when they played in the national championship, they played a 10-man rotation, and they did great. They made it to the national championship game, right? The first ever Final Four. And so it wasn't a problem then. The year after that, they played 10 and they made it to the Sweet 16. Last year, they played 10. Last year wasn't as good. Um, but it didn't seem like there was an issue of playing too many guys. This year, they're playing 11. Now, maybe 10 is the limit. Maybe playing more than 10 guys kind of shows those strains on the rotation, those strains on the output. Could be. That could be the case. Given how much offensive output there's been, though, I think it's a little hard to make that argument. If people want to say that it's hard to it's hard to find your rotations, it's hard for guys to get into a rhythm in the game, and that's hurting the output. You can say that. That's what the general consensus is. But this is also one of the best offenses the Aztecs have had in their history, according to Ken Palm. Uh, they're around 50th in the nation offensively right now, and in the Dutcher era, they've had 2 years better than that. In 2020, they were 10th. In 2021, they were in the 40s somewhere. I think the low 40s, like 41, 42. And so this is one of the better offenses. And if you look at just the raw number of points per 100 possessions, this is the highest number they've had ever. Under Dutcher, under Fisher, doesn't matter. This is the highest number. And so the offense hasn't been the problem, I don't think. If someone wants to make the argument that, well, it's hurting the defensive rhythm, then maybe we have something to talk about because the offense has been fine. If it's hurting the defense rhythm, maybe. That's not usually what you hear when coaches talk about guys not getting into the rhythm of the game. It's usually on the offensive end in terms of knowing where their shots are going to come from, knowing when they should be taking the shot versus when they shouldn't be, being able to read the game quick enough, stuff like that. You don't usually hear it on the defensive end. But if it is, okay, then there's something to talk about. I just think there's not much. tangible evidence that the rotation is hurting the team specifically. It's a lot of like it would make sense if it was hurting the team. Like this could be a thing, is what is most of the analysis that I'm seeing. But there aren't very many like specific examples where you can say, well, if they played one less player, then this mistake wouldn't have been made, or something like that. I think one thing we could point to, if only to play devil's advocate here, one thing we could point to is Taj DeGorville during the Lamar game when he got pulled out supposedly after a defensive mistake. I went back and looked at the tape for his whole stint, and I didn't really think I saw anything there really. So I don't know why he got pulled out, but I guess he got upset and went to the locker room and ripped off his jersey. And then speaking of that Aztec culture, Jamal Franklin came out of the stands and went back to the locker room and kind of talked him down. Supposedly Latrell Davis also did too, so good on both of them. And then Taj came back in and kind of finished the game and played okay. But that could be one thing. Like does is was that result a result of not playing enough minutes? Maybe that would be a tangible thing. If somebody wants to say that's a result of not getting enough minutes, that's what that frustration is, I could buy that. I don't know if that one thing is enough to say the depth is a problem, but maybe it's an indicator of other things that we haven't seen. Possibly, sure. I could buy into that. Uh, that does lead us to the next part of the question, though, which is if that is the problem, who out of the 11 guys are you taking out of the rotation? And also keep in mind that it's probably somebody, maybe not probably, but taking them out of the rotation may very well increase their chances that they leave in the transfer portal after this season because they all feel like they're good enough. And that's just a common thing you're gonna have to face. And so you're not just looking at who are you okay with taking out of the rotation right now, but potentially who are you okay with leaving after this season. Uh, and there's a number of places you could go, right? I saw somebody say something like Sean Newman is lucky to be the fourth string point guard on this team, uh, which is insane. He's absolutely not. He's the second string point guard at this point, and on top of that, he leads the team in plus minus. Over the last couple games, he's been one of the best players for the Aztecs, despite being scared to take a shot, which is just crazy to me. But his defensive activity, his passing ability, his ball handling, his just understanding of the game. If you just watch when you turn on the game, spend a 4 minute stretch just watching Sean Newman and seeing how he's always pointing at guys, telling them where the next pass should be. See how when he throws a lob, like he'll throw a lob to somebody like Farrell Compton, and Compton dunks it, and everybody starts cheering and flexing and doing all this stuff, and Sean Newman doesn't do any of that. He's just like, get back on defense. Let's go. Like we haven't done anything yet. It's not the same, obviously, but it reminds me a little bit of the Kobe Bryant interview where they're up in whatever series they were in, and the reporter's like, "You don't seem happy," and Kobe's like, "Job's not finished. Is the job finished?" Like it's kind of like that. Where Sean Newman's like, "We have to get back on defense. If we're here cheering and they score, we didn't actually accomplish anything." So I loved seeing that. Just watch him for a 4 minute stretch, and you'll see things you like. Not star player things. He's not going to be the best player on the team, but you'll see things you like. Uh, all that to say, you're probably not cutting him. Are you going to cut the player with the worst plus minus on the team, the only player with a negative plus minus on the team, Bagun Guath, a -3? Probably not, right? Or not cut, but bench. Are you going to bench him? Probably not, right? You're hoping that, like I said, you're hoping he gets better by the end of the year. And so you're not benching him, right? You're giving him minutes and you're just going to take the lumps as they come and hope that at the end of the year he's better than he was his peak last year because he's a sophomore now and he wants to get better. So you're not cutting the crew off. or benching. God, I got to stick with benching. Are you going to bench Jeremiah Odin? I mean, maybe he hasn't been bad though. He's kind of another guy who I feel like for the most part he's kind of found his role. And even if he's not providing what I thought the Aztecs needed dearly over the offseason, he's been better than I thought he would be. Pretty significantly. I don't know if he's been good. He's been maybe average, but like he's better than I thought he would be. So I don't know if you're benching him. Taj DeGorville would probably be my choice just because he's been struggling pretty much since the season started. He's had a couple flashes here and there, but he hasn't been great. Uh, I do think he can kind of turn around and get better. It seemed like even last year maybe he was a little bit better, at least as a passer. But I also don't want Taj to leave next year. And I mean, he could leave next year even if you keep him in the rotation if he doesn't think he's getting enough minutes. That's the thing as well. But I feel like Taj is, in terms of production, he's probably the easy choice. You know, do you bench Tay Simmons? He's been kind of killing it, at least in spurts, right? The Lamar game wasn't super great for him. He also only had 9 minutes, but it wasn't super great for him, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't like, oh man, this was bad. We got to bench you. It would mostly just be because he's a freshman, but he's also probably one of the better rebounders on a team that needs rebound, right? So there's a number of places you could look. There's a number of places you could go. Um, I don't think any one player terribly stands out as like, yes, this is the player you have to bench. Uh, People like to pick on Sean Newman early on, and that I think has fallen on its head. Uh, Taj DeGorville seems like maybe the option at this point. And because I'm saying that, he will be probably uh, dropping 20 points against Air Force and 4 assists and 5 rebounds. You know, he'll have like a crazy game or something. Um, because I said like right now he looks like the guy who would be benched. So that's all that to consider. I kind of I know I'm in the minority here, but I don't think the depth is it's definitely not the issue, and I don't even know to what extent it is an issue for this team. With that, I guess what are the issues for the team? And I think there's three things that I've kind of noticed. And the first one is also maybe like the laziest analysis, and it's kind of frustrating because it's one that we can't really do anything about, but it's health. Uh, I mentioned Miles Bird's injuries earlier. Reese Waters has had some things. It's why he missed the first game. Magoon Guath is coming back from an injury, and those types of injuries, sometimes, you know, you'll hear stories about how it takes a guy a year to kind of get back on the floor. And it didn't take Goon a year, but it took a while to get back on the floor. And then it takes another year to like get your confidence in your body back and get your game rhythm back. And we're hoping it doesn't take Goon that long. But getting that health back, getting everybody healthy, especially among those big three, I think is maybe the biggest factor. And it's just a matter of like luck, I guess, almost on if people can get healthy enough to start playing more consistently, right? So that's number one is just the health. And if they get healthy, I think that'll solve a good amount of issues, especially Magoo and Guath, because he hasn't been great. He's been he's been not great, is all I can say. The Lamar game did look a little bit better for sure, and the announcers mentioned that, and they were talking, I think, more so just in terms of how long he could stay on the floor, but also just his performance, his movement, his ability seemed a little bit better, just minorly. I don't think he's where he was last year still, but seemed better. So hopefully he can continue to progress. And by the time we're 10 games into conference season, be kind of where he was last year and then continue to progress from there. Would kind of be my hope. I don't know how realistic that is, but just keep getting a little bit better every day, hopefully. And that'll Magoon being good alone will solve a lot of problems. Number two, I think, is the point guard play. And it's it's so tough when the Aztecs have so much talent, uh, but they're weak at the point guard position because college basketball is a point guard driven game, and their point guards just haven't been great. And we can look at them, right? I think they're each they're each good at something, but none of them is like a complete player out of the three players. And so we can look at them so far. LZ Harrington has been the best scorer. Some of that is boosted by an unsustainable 3-point percentage. I think he's hit 10 of 13 from behind the arc, and that'll boost your scoring numbers. He also, though, I really love his elbow jumper. He gets there easily. The shot looks good. Reminds me a lot of Xavier Thames because he also loved that elbow jumper, and it seems like a pretty consistent shot for him. And so he seems like the best scorer. His passing seems like it's maybe not there yet. He's maybe shown some flashes, but he's also had some really bad games in terms of creating for others. And his defense will come. I don't think it's great at this point, but he's a freshman. He's learning the system. I don't think it's great yet, but it'll come. So he can be kind of like a scorer, and his defense can get better, and we'll see about the passing. Contrast that with Taj DeBoerville, who has been an atrocious scorer this season. It just doesn't shoot the ball well. Uh, is a decent passer. Maybe not the level I thought he would be this year after what he did last year, but is a decent passer. But is probably the best defender of the group. I would argue he's the best of the point guard defenders. And then contrast that with Sean Newman, who is also an atrocious scorer, but is probably by far the best passer on the group. Just his basketball IQ when he's out there is crazy. And he's not gonna like lock anybody down. He's not a Lamont Butler type of defender, but he seems like a pretty good team defender. Like he understands where he's supposed to be, when he's supposed to be there, plays with position, plays with angles, things like that. So like great passing, okay defense, terrible scoring, right? They all kind of have something like that. Like they're great at one thing, maybe not great, but at least good at one thing. Uh, they're like kind of passable at a second thing, and then bad at the third thing. If the point guard position can be figured out, can get more consistent, that I think will also solve some issues because it's a guard-driven league. Despite how good Sean Newman has been and how high I've been on him over the past couple games, I don't know that I would argue that he should be starting. Um, if you want to make that argument, I posted this on Blue Sky a little while ago. The argument would be that when he's on the floor, everybody plays better. It's documented out at evanmia.com. When he's on the floor, everybody plays better than their average. Every single player on the team. You can't say that about Taj. You can't say that about LZ. You can't even say that about the stars like Bird or Waters. Um, but you can say that about Newman. Every single player plays better. So he should be getting a good dose of minutes and should be getting them at the point guard position. If you want to keep LZ starting, I'm fine with that overall. Um, he's shown enough flashes that you kind of want to plant that seed and, and water it with minutes and game time and starting positions and confidence builders and all that stuff. So I'm okay with that, but hopefully those positions get better as players get more comfortable. Both Sean and LZ are new to the team. And so as they get better, as they learn their teammates better, as they build chemistry, as they learn the system, hopefully those things can improve. And even if the aspects that they aren't good at don't improve, if just the ones that they are good at get better, that would help. And then the last thing to talk about is the defense. The defense does not seem like it's been up to Aztec standards this season. This will be, I think, if things continue, it'll be the second worst defense the Aztecs have had in the Brian Dutcher era. Which isn't, I guess, saying a lot because they normally have really, really good defenses, but it's not looking great. The 2019 season when it was Devin Watson and Jalen McDaniels were kind of the stars of the team. That's the only other one that compares. And that one was worse, but still, uh, the defense needs to be figured out. And my thoughts on the defense are that I wonder if the scheme doesn't match the personnel very well. And I feel like the coaches have started to pick up on that a little bit. When the season started, they were doing a lot of hard hedges as their primary pick and roll defense. That's what they did a lot last year too. So it made sense to try and carry it over. But it seemed like the opponents were scoring on that all the time. Um, the Aztecs have a team of a bunch of guys who are lanky and athletic, but not a lot of big guys. And it seems like even last year they were able to play a more physical style of half court defense. And I wonder if they should be playing more running, trapping style of ball pressure. They still want ball pressure. That's non-negotiable. But I wonder if they can do it in other ways, maybe some more full court pressure instead of that soft press they do. Let's get some like actual traps in the backside there. Um, let's get some blitzes rather than some hard hedges. Let's do some things of that nature and just cause disruption and havoc. And that would be another reason, if you're gonna play that way, to play 11 guys because the you can just go hard the entire time, right? And that's one thing that I do think has been problematic is if you're going to play 11 guys, guys need to be going hard the entire time. They need to be sprinting all the time. There should be very little jogging, basically, and you're just gonna on conditioning wear out the other team, which is something they try to do with their physicality, and I wonder if they do it with running instead this year. I don't know if they're going to do that. But it's something I'd like to see. I'd like to see a lot more running with them playing 11 guys, both offensively and defensively. And I think what they've done so far is they've been implementing, instead of those hard hedges, they've been implementing more drop coverage, which has been better than the hard hedges. So improvement. And they've done a little bit more switching as well. I don't know how good. Like, I don't know if I want Miles Heide doing a lot of switching. Maybe Goon, when he's healthier, can do some switching. They do have some bigger guards, though. LZ Harrington, Taj DeGorville, both 6'5". So, like, if ever they had a roster on the guard end that should be switching, this is it. They used to switch Darian Trammell onto 6'8", 6'9", 6'10" dudes. Uh, the guards now, size-wise, are better equipped for it. Uh, and unfortunately, just the bigs maybe not as well equipped for it. Um, but switching, I mean, still seems in the few times they've done it, seems like it's worked better than the hard hedges. So it does seem like they are working on fixing the defense, on tweaking things and installing new things that will help them succeed more than the hard hedges were. I'm expecting to see less and less of the hard hedging because it just hasn't been working well. Uh, but we'll see. And I think that's probably the thing that they can control the most because the injuries are just kind of luck. The development you can control, but it's a long game. And fixing the defense to a certain extent is a long game too, but it's also just a we can just change how we play. We can install this new thing, and this is just what we do now. And once the system is learned, however long that takes, the pretty instantaneous results if you've made the right decisions. And so that's the thing. Hopefully, the Aztecs can get back to their lockdown defense ways. And if they do, their offense is really good this year. Like I said, it's one of the best in the Dutcher era so far, and still has a chance to get better as people get healthy, as the point guard play improves, as the defense improves. Um, and so the offense can get better. And so if the defense can get better, this team can still be scary. Those are my three thoughts. If anybody has anything else they've noticed that they want to point out, please share it with me. I'm all ears. If you think I'm wrong, just share that. Feel free. I by no means think I'm always right. I do have reasons why I think the way I do, but if shown a different thing of evidence, if there's, something that I forgot about, or if there's something that happened that's like, oh, actually, this kind of does maybe show that the depth is a problem, for example, I'd be open to it. I'm always open to hearing new things, to hearing what maybe I missed. So if you're up for that, feel free to share, uh, comment on the show, find me on social medias, Blue Sky, TikTok, places like that. Even just shoot me an email, aztecbreakdown@gmail.com. Other than that, I think that does it for this one, ladies and gentlemen and Aztec fans. And with that, I will catch you next time. Go Aztecs.